The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Lincoln Elementary School as Sophie Chen wiped down the last desk in her 5th grade classroom. Her fingers ached from the repetitive motion, just like they ached every night after her second shift at the hospital cafeteria would end at midnight. But this was her favorite time of day, these quiet moments after the chaos of 28 10-year-olds had subsided, when she could finally breathe. She was 26 years old, and exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. 2 jobs, a studio apartment in the worst part of Chicago's South Side, and student loans that seemed to multiply like rabbits. But teaching, despite everything, still felt like the only thing she'd ever been meant to do. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Sophie gathered the stack of essays her students had, written about their heroes. Most had chosen predictable answers: parents, athletes, and fictional characters. But one paper, tucked at the bottom of the pile, made her pause. The handwriting was careful, almost architectural in its precision. "My hero is my dad," it began, "not because he's strong or famous, but because even when people stare, even when they whisper, even when the world tells him he's broken, he wakes up every morning and chooses to keep fighting. He says warriors aren't made in victory. They're made in the moments when getting out of bed feels impossible, but you do it anyway." The paper was written by Marco Valentini, the quiet boy who sat in the back corner, who arrived early and left late, whose dark eyes seemed to carry shadows no child should know. The boy in the wheelchair who'd transferred to her class 6 weeks ago without explanation, with attendance records that showed more absences than present days, and with a father who'd never once appeared at parent-teacher conferences. Sophie slipped the essay into her bag. She'd read it again tonight, would try to decode the pain hidden between those careful words. The overhead lights flickered, the school's ancient electrical system protesting the storm. Sophie grabbed her worn canvas bag and headed for the door, already dreading the 3-bus journey home through the rain. She was halfway down the hallway when she heard it. Voices, young and cruel, echoing from the direction of the side entrance where parents picked up their kids. "Wheels! Hey, Wheels! Where you rolling to?" Sophie's stomach dropped. She recognized that voice. Brandon Kowalski, 12 years old going on 30. The kind of kid who'd learned cruelty early and perfected it daily. "I said, where you going, cripple?" Sophie ran. She burst through the side doors into the covered pickup area just as Brandon shoved Marco's wheelchair. The chair rolled backward, hit the curb, and Marco went sprawling onto the wet concrete, his backpack scattering papers across the rain-soaked ground. 3 other boys circled him, laughing. Marco tried to pull himself up, his thin arms shaking with effort, his face carefully blank in that way Sophie recognized, the way kids learn to hide their humiliation. "Hey," Sophie's voice cut through the rain like a whip. "Back away from him. Now." Brandon spun around, his face shifting from cruel glee to calculated innocence in a heartbeat. "We were just playing, Miss Chen. Wheels doesn't mind. Do you, Wheels?" "His name," Sophie said, her voice deadly quiet as she moved between the boys and Marco, "is Marco, and you will never, ever touch him again. Do you understand me?" "Or what?" Brandon's eyes glinted with challenge. "You gonna give us detention? My dad's on the school board. 1 phone call and you're fired." Sophie had heard threats like this before. Brandon's father owned half the real estate in the district and wasn't shy about wielding that power. Last year, he'd gotten 2 teachers transferred for giving Brandon failing grades. But something in Sophie snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was seeing Marco's carefully blank expression. Maybe it was 3 years of watching bullies win because they had money and connections. Whatever it was, she took a step toward Brandon, her voice low and furious. "I don't care if your father owns this entire city. You put your hands on another student. You mock someone for something they can't control. You act like a coward hiding behind daddy's money. And I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Not a detention, not a phone call home. I will stand in front of the school board, in front of your parents, in front of God himself, and I will tell the truth about what I saw today. So ask yourself, is tormenting a kid in a wheelchair really worth it?" Brandon's face flushed red. For a moment, Sophie thought he might actually back down, but then he smiled, cold and calculating. "You're gonna regret this, Miss Chen. Get out of here." The boys slunk away, throwing backward glances that promised retaliation. Sophie didn't care. She turned to Marco, who was still on the ground, trying to gather his scattered papers with shaking hands. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Let me help. I can do it myself." His voice was quiet but firm. Not rude, just determined. "I know you can. But maybe you'll let me help anyway?" Marco looked at her for a long moment, those dark eyes assessing, deciding whether she was like all the other adults who either pitied him or ignored him. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded once. Together they gathered his papers. Sophie noticed the careful organization, each subject in a different colored folder, every assignment hole-punched and filed. This was a kid who had control over so little in his life that he made order wherever he could. She helped him back into his wheelchair, noting how he positioned himself with practiced efficiency, how he adjusted the footrests with the casual expertise of someone who'd been doing this a long time. "How long has Brandon been bothering you?" she asked. Marco shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Why?" The question was direct, almost challenging. "You're a teacher. Teachers always say they care, but then nothing changes. Brandon will still be here tomorrow. His dad will still own half the school board, and you'll realize getting involved just makes your life harder." The cynicism in a 10-year-old's voice broke something in Sophie's chest. "You wrote that your dad was your hero because he keeps fighting even when it's hard," she said quietly. "Where do you think he learned that someone had to show him that fighting was worth it? Someone had to stand up for him when he couldn't stand up for himself. Maybe that's what heroes do. Not because it's easy, but because it's right." For the first time, Marco's carefully blank expression cracked. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "My dad's late," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "He's always late. It's okay. I can wait inside." Sophie looked at her watch. 4:15. The buses would be running less frequently in the rain. If she missed the next one, she'd be late for her hospital shift. She'd already been written up twice for tardiness. "I'll wait with you," she heard herself say. They sat under the covered pickup area, watching the rain sheet down. Marco was silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Sophie pulled out the essays, including his, and started reading, making notes in the margins. "You're a good writer?" she said after a few minutes. "Really good. This line about warriors being made in impossible moments, that's profound." Marco's cheeks flushed slightly. "My dad says stuff like that. When I'm having a bad day, when the chair feels like a cage, he reminds me that strength isn't about what your body it can do. It's about what your mind refuses to accept. He sounds like a wise man. He's the best man." Marco's voice was fierce with loyalty. "People think because of what he does for work, because of our name, that he's bad. But they don't know him. They don't know how he reads to me every night, even when he's exhausted, how he learned sign language just in case the accident had been worse, just in case I couldn't speak. How he fired his entire security team because one of them looked at me with pity." Sophie's attention sharpened. Security team? The Valentini name suddenly clicked into place in her mind. She'd heard it whispered in teachers' lounges, had seen it in news reports carefully worded to avoid libel. Valentini. As in Luca Valentini. As in the man who supposedly controlled everything from the ports to City Hall. As in the head of Chicago's most powerful crime family. This child, this brave, brilliant, hurting child, was the son of a mafia boss. Sophie's mouth went dry. Suddenly, Brandon's threat seemed laughably insignificant compared to the danger she might have just walked into. But then she looked at Marco, at his thin shoulders squared against a world that had been cruel to him, at the essay clutched in her hand about a father who kept fighting, and she made a decision. It didn't matter who his father was. It didn't matter what he did for a living. Marco was her student. He was a child, and he deserved to be protected. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. "Your dad sounds like he loves you very much," she said evenly. "He does. More than anything. He says I'm his reason for everything." A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot, moving with predatory grace through the rain. Sophie's heart hammered as the vehicle stopped directly in front of them. The back door opened, and a man emerged. Luca Valentini was not what Sophie expected. Yes, he was tall, powerfully built, moving with the controlled violence of someone who could end a threat before it fully formed. But his face, scarred along one cheekbone and weathered in a way that spoke of hard years, held an expression of such fierce tenderness as he looked at his son that Sophie felt like she was intruding on something sacred. Marco. The name came out rough, relieved. I'm sorry I'm late. The meeting ran over in traffic. It's okay, Dad. Miss Chen waited with me. Luca's eyes, dark as midnight and just as fathomless, fixed on Sophie. She felt the weight of his gaze, the assessment happening in a fraction of a second. Threat or ally, danger or safe. She had the distinct impression that her life might depend on his conclusion. Miss Chen, he said, his voice carrying the trace of an accent Sophie couldn't quite place. You're Marco's teacher. Yes, 5th grade English and social studies. The one he talks about. The one who lets him stay in during recess to read. Sophie blinked. He told you about that? My son tells me everything. Luca's expression was unreadable. Everything. The word hung heavy with implication. Marco would have told him about the bullying, which meant Luca knew she'd just intervened, which meant he was here to either thank her or warn her off. Sophie lifted her chin. Mr. Valentini, your son is an exceptional student. Brilliant, actually. But he's been struggling with some social dynamics, and I want you to know that I take the safety and well-being of all my students very seriously. Social dynamics. Luca's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's a diplomatic way of describing what I heard happen today. Marco's eyes widened. Dad? I got a call. Luca interrupted gently, ruffling his son's hair. From Mrs. Patterson in the front office. She saw what happened. She told me a teacher put herself between you and 4 older boys. Told me that teacher threatened one of the most powerful families in the district to protect you. Sophie's stomach dropped. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been cold to her since the day she'd been hired, who'd made it clear that young teachers, especially young teachers who didn't know their place, were a liability. I did what any teacher would do, Sophie said, though they both knew that wasn't true. No, Luca said quietly, stepping closer. You did what any decent human being should do, but most don't. You saw my son being hurt, and you didn't calculate the cost. You didn't think about consequences or connections or cover your ass. You just acted. He was close enough now that Sophie could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the scar on his cheekbone that looked like it had come from a knife. Thank you, he said, and the simple words carried a weight that made Sophie's breath catch. Thank you for seeing him. Not the wheelchair, not the last name, not the rumors or the fear, just him. He's easy to see, Sophie said softly. He's remarkable. Something flickered in Luca's eyes. Surprise? Gratitude? Pain? Can I give you a ride home? He asked abruptly. It's pouring, and I'm guessing you take public transportation. I don't want to impose. Miss Chen. Luca's voice was gentle but firm. You stood up for my son. The least I can do is make sure you don't catch pneumonia getting home. Please. Sophie looked at Marco, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. She thought about the 3-bus journey, the rain, the shift at the hospital she was probably already going to be late for. Okay, she heard herself say. Thank you. The SUV's interior was warm, luxurious in a way that made Sophie acutely aware of her threadbare coat and scuffed shoes. Marco chatted happily from his wheelchair, which had been secured with practiced efficiency, telling his father about the book they were reading in class, about the essay he'd written. Luca listened with complete attention, asking questions, engaging with genuine interest. This was not the cold mafia boss of movies and news reports. This was a father who loved his son with an intensity that was almost frightening in its devotion. Where to? Luca asked Sophie, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. She gave him her address, watching his expression carefully. No judgment crossed his face when she named one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. No pity. Just a slight tightening around his eyes that might have been concern. They drove in comfortable silence, Marco pointing out landmarks, chattering about nothing and everything. When they pulled up to Sophie's building, with its cracked facade and flickering security light, Luca put the car in park. Miss Chen, he said, turning to face her. The boy who bothered Marco today, Brandon Kowalski. His father is going to call the school. He's going to demand you be fired. Sophie's blood ran cold, but she lifted her chin. I know. But I'd do it again. I know you would. Luca's smile was real this time, transforming his face. That's why I'm going to make sure you keep Your job. Nathan Kowalski owns property in this city, but he does business with people who answer to me. By tomorrow morning, he'll withdraw any complaint. You'll be untouchable. I don't want you to. I'm not asking your permission. Luca's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You protected my son. That debt can never be fully repaid. But I can start by making sure you don't lose your livelihood for doing the right thing. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to refuse the help of a man who probably had blood on his hands, who commanded criminals, who lived in a world she wanted nothing to do with. But she thought about her student loans, her rent, the hospital shift she needed to keep. She thought about being able to continue teaching, to protect other kids like Marco. Thank you, she whispered. One more thing. Luca pulled out a business card, plain white with just a phone number. If anyone ever threatens you, if you ever feel unsafe, if you ever need anything, you call that number, day or night. Doesn't matter what it is. You call, and I will answer. Sophie took the card with trembling fingers. Mr. Valentini. Luca, please. Luca, she corrected softly. Your son wrote that you're his hero. After today, I understand why. Something raw and vulnerable crossed Luca's face before he mastered it. He's mine, Luca said quietly. My son is my hero. Everything I do, every choice I make, every line I cross or refuse to cross, it's all for him. To build a world where people will see him the way you do, as remarkable. Sophie opened the car door, clutching the business card. He already is remarkable. The world just needs to catch up. As she walked toward her building, Sophie heard Marco's voice calling after her. Miss Chen, see you tomorrow. She turned, waving. See you tomorrow, Marco. Don't forget to finish Chapter 7. The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Sophie climbed the stairs to her studio apartment, her mind reeling. She'd just accepted help from a Mafia boss. She'd just been given a direct line to a man who could probably make people disappear with a phone call. She'd just stepped into a world that existed in shadows and violence and codes she didn't understand. But when she pulled out Marco's essay and read it again, when she remembered the boy's carefully blank expression as he gathered papers in the rain, when she thought about a father's fierce love for his son, Sophie knew she'd made the right choice. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything. She just hoped she was ready for what came next. Sophie arrived at Lincoln Elementary the next morning with her heart in her throat, expecting to find a termination letter waiting in her mailbox. Instead, she found something else entirely. Principal Howard stood in the hallway outside her classroom, his usually stern face arranged in an expression of uncomfortable deference. Beside him stood a woman in an expensive suit, her silver hair swept back in an elegant chignon, her posture radiating authority. Miss Chen, Principal Howard said, his voice strained. This is Evelyn Castellano from the district office. She'd like a word. Sophie's stomach dropped. The district office. They'd sent someone from downtown to fire her in person. That was somehow worse than a letter. Of course, Sophie said, her voice steadier than she felt. My classroom? That would be fine, miss, Castellano said, her tone neutral but not unkind. Once inside, with the door closed, Miss Castellano didn't sit. She walked to the window, looking out at the playground where early arrivals were gathering. I received a very interesting phone call last night, she said without preamble, from Nathan Kowalski. He wanted to file a formal complaint against you for threatening his son. Here it comes, Sophie thought, bracing herself. And then, Miss Castellano continued, turning to face her. I received 3 more phone calls. The first was from Mr. Kowalski again, withdrawing his complaint entirely. Apologizing, actually, which I've never heard him do in 15 years of knowing him. The second was from the superintendent, informing me that your teaching contract was being extended 2 years, with a raise, and that you were being nominated for the district's Excellence in Education Award. Sophie's mouth fell open. I don't understand. Neither did I, Miss Castellano said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Until I received the third call, from a man who didn't give his name but who made it very clear that you are under protection, that any attempt to discipline or remove you from your position would be considered a personal affront, and that you have carte blanche to handle your classroom and your students as you see fit, with full administrative support. The room felt too small suddenly, too hot. Sophie sat down hard in her desk chair. I didn't ask for any of this, she whispered. I know. Miss Castellano's expression softened. Principal Howard filled me in on what happened yesterday. You defended a student who was being bullied. You did your job, Miss Chen, and you did it well. However you acquired this protection. You earned it honestly. But nothing. Miss Castellano pulled out a folder from her briefcase. Here's your new contract. Sign it, take the raise, accept the nomination, and continue being the kind of teacher who puts students first. Consequences be damned. We need more people like you, not fewer. After Miss Castellano left, Sophie sat in her empty classroom, staring at the contract. A 2-year extension. A raise that would let her quit the hospital job, maybe even move to a better apartment. Recognition she'd never dreamed of receiving. All because Luca Valentini had made a phone call. The weight of that debt settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. When students began arriving, Sophie forced herself into teacher mode, greeting each one by name, helping with coats and backpacks. Marco arrived exactly on time, wheeling himself through the door with practiced efficiency. "Morning, Miss Chen," he said, his smile brighter than she'd seen before. "Morning, Marco. Did you finish chapter 7? Finished the whole book. Couldn't put it down." Of course he had. Sophie watched him navigate to his spot in the back corner, watched the other students give him a wide berth, not out of cruelty but uncertainty. They didn't know how to approach the quiet boy in the wheelchair with the dangerous last name, except for one girl. Jasmine Rodriguez, bright and fearless, wheeled her desk over to Marco's station without asking permission. "Hey," she said. "Want to be partners for the history project? I was thinking we could do ours on the Chicago fire. Lots of good pictures, and my abuela has stories about how her family lost everything but rebuilt." Marco blinked, surprised. Sure, that sounds good." Sophie felt her throat tighten with emotion. Small moments. Small acts of inclusion that meant everything. The day proceeded normally until lunch. Sophie was monitoring the cafeteria when she noticed Brandon Kowalski sitting alone at a corner table, his usual entourage nowhere in sight. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Against her better judgment, Sophie approached him. "Brandon, everything okay?" He looked up, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "My dad," he said quietly. "He made me apologize to Marco this morning, made me shake his hand in front of everybody, and he said if I ever bothered him again, there would be consequences. Real consequences. He was scared, Miss Chen. My dad's never scared of anything, but he was terrified." Sophie didn't know what to say. She felt a chill run down her spine, thinking about what kind of conversation Luca might have had with Nathan Kowalski to produce that effect. "Maybe," she said carefully, "this is an opportunity. To be better than you were. To choose kindness instead of cruelty." Brandon laughed bitterly. "You don't get it. My dad told me what Marco's dad does. What he is. And he told me that if I so much as look at Marco wrong, our whole family is finished. I'm not being nice because I want to be. I'm being nice because I'm terrified." "Fear can be the beginning of wisdom," Sophie said softly. "What you do with that fear, whether you let it make you bitter or better, that's up to you." She walked away before he could respond, her mind churning. This was the world Marco lived in, where protection came with fear, where safety required violence, where a father's love manifested as threats and power plays. The rest of the school day passed without incident. Marco thrived in his partnership with Jasmine, their heads bent together over library books about the Chicago fire. When the final bell rang, Sophie helped students pack up, watching as Marco carefully organized his folders. "Miss Chen?" His voice was hesitant. "My dad wanted me to ask if you'd like to come to dinner. At our house, tomorrow night. He said to tell you it's not an order or an obligation, just an invitation, and that you can say no without any weirdness." Sophie's first instinct was to refuse. Getting more involved with the Valentini family, seeing Luca again in his own territory, crossing that line from professional gratitude into personal relationship, it felt dangerous. But Marco was looking at her with such hope, such carefully hidden vulnerability, that she couldn't bring herself to disappoint him. "I'd love to," she heard herself say. Marco's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? That's awesome. Dad's actually a great cook. He makes this pasta that's, like, better than any restaurant, and we have a library. A whole room just for books. You'd love it. I'm sure I will. What time? 7? I can text you the address. Wait, you have a phone, right? Dad said not to assume because you might not want to give out your phone number, but I need it for the address. Marco, Sophie said gently, pulling out her phone. It's okay. Here. They exchanged numbers, and Sophie felt another invisible line being crossed. Personal phone numbers, dinner invitations. This was no longer just a teacher protecting a student. This was something else. Something she couldn't quite name yet. That night, Sophie stood in front of her meager closet, trying to figure out what one wore to dinner at a Mafia boss's house. Too casual seemed disrespectful. Too formal seemed like she was trying too hard. In the end, she settled on dark jeans and a simple burgundy sweater that Rachel had given her last Christmas, the nicest thing she owned. The address Marco had texted was in Lincoln Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago. Sophie took the train, watching the city transform outside the windows as she moved from her rundown South Side neighborhood into increasingly affluent territory. The Valentini house was not what she expected. Instead of a fortress-like mansion, it was an elegant brownstone tucked on a tree-lined street, with warm light spilling from tall windows. A single security camera above the door was the only visible indication that this might be home to someone who required protection. Sophie rang the bell, her heart hammering. Luca answered the door himself, and Sophie's breath caught. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple black Henley, his feet bare, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. But his eyes, those dark, fathomless eyes, carried the same intensity. Sophie, he said, her first name sounding different in his accent. Thank you for coming. Please, come in. The interior was beautiful, but lived in. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, photographs on every surface. Marco at various ages, sometimes with Luca, sometimes with a beautiful woman who must have been his mother. Books everywhere, stacked on tables, filling built-in shelves, creating a sense of warmth and intellectual curiosity. Your home is lovely, Sophie said. Thank you. Marco designed most of it. After the accident, we renovated everything to be accessible, and I let him choose colors, furniture, layout. This is his space as much as mine. Dad, Marco's voice called from somewhere deeper in the house. Is Miss Chen here? Living room, Luca called back. Marco wheeled in, wearing a Chicago Bulls t-shirt and a grin that transformed his usually serious face. You came. Of course I came. You promised me pasta better than any restaurant. That's a serious claim. Dad delivers. Trust me. Marco wheeled closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. He's been cooking all day. He made 3 different sauces because he couldn't remember which one I told him you liked, so he made them all. It's kind of adorable, actually. Marco, Luca said warningly, but Sophie caught the faint flush on his cheeks. What? It's true. You're nervous. I've never seen you nervous. I'm not nervous. I'm being a good host. You're nervous, Marco stage whispered to Sophie. He reorganized the bookshelf 4 times. Sophie laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she'd laughed like that, unguarded and genuine? Dinner was served in a dining room that managed to be both elegant and comfortable, with candles on the table and jazz playing softly in the background. Luca had indeed made 3 different pasta dishes, each one more delicious than the last. This is incredible, Sophie said after her first bite of carbonara. Marco wasn't exaggerating. My mother's recipe, Luca said quietly. She believed that food was love made tangible, that sitting down together, sharing a meal, was sacred. She sounds wise. She was. She also would have loved you. She always said the true measure of a person was how they treated those who couldn't fight back. You defended Marco when he needed it most. She would have called you family for that alone. The word family hung in the air, weighted with meaning Sophie didn't fully understand yet. Marco dominated the conversation, telling Sophie about his current reading list, about the history project with Jasmine, about a comic book series he was obsessed with. Luca listened with the same complete attention he'd shown in the car, asking questions, engaging genuinely. Can I show Miss Chen the library? Marco asked after they'd finished eating. If she'd like to see it, Luca said, looking at Sophie. I'd love to. The library was everything Marco had promised and more. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books, a rolling ladder to reach the upper shelves, comfortable chairs positioned near tall windows, and in the corner, a reading nook that had clearly been designed with Marco in mind, low shelves within reach. A cushioned window seat with a ramp leading up to it. "This is heaven," Sophie breathed, running her fingers along leather spines. "Right?" Marco wheeled to his reading nook. "Dad built this whole room for me. After the accident, when I was in the hospital for 3 months, he read to me every single day, sometimes the same book over and over because I couldn't focus on new stories. And when I finally came home, this was waiting. He said if the world was going to be harder to navigate, at least I'd have unlimited worlds in books." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at Luca, who was standing in the doorway, watching his son with undisguised love. "Your dad is pretty special," she said to Marco. "The best," Marco agreed, "even if he is overprotective, and kind of scary sometimes, and definitely involved in things that would make most people run screaming." "Marco," Luca's voice held warning. "What?" "She knows, Dad. Everyone knows. It's not like it's a secret." Marco looked at Sophie directly. "My dad does bad things to bad people. He runs an organization that exists outside the law. He makes decisions that would keep most people up at night. And I know all of that. But I also know that he's never lied to me, never treated me like I'm fragile, never made me feel like the wheelchair defines me. He's my dad, and that's what matters." The silence that followed was profound. Sophie found herself unable to look away from Luca, who stood frozen in the doorway, his expression raw. "I should clarify something," Sophie said carefully. "I don't know anything about your father's business. I don't want to know. What I know is that he loves you fiercely, that he showed up when you needed him, that he's building a world for you out of that love. The rest isn't my concern." "Even though it should be?" Luca's voice was rough. "Even though any sane person would run from a man like me?" Sophie met his eyes. "I've met a lot of respectable people, Mr. Valentini. People with clean hands and prestigious jobs who look the other way when kids are being bullied, who make excuses for cruelty because the bully has the right last name, who value reputation over doing what's right. So forgive me if I'm less concerned with the legality of your business and more impressed by the fact that you raised a son who writes essays about warriors and reads books about hope and believes his father is a hero." Something shifted in Luca's expression. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, like he was seeing her truly for the first time. "Marco," he said quietly, "why don't you give Miss Chen and me a few minutes alone?" "Ooh, grown-up talk." Marco grinned. "I'll be in my room. Yell if you need a referee." After Marco wheeled out, Luca moved into the library, closing the door behind him. The space suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "I need you to understand something," he said, not moving closer. "The protection I offered you, the things I did to secure your job, they come with a cost. Not to you," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "To me, to my reputation, to how I'm perceived in both worlds. I don't understand. In my world, protection is currency. It's offered strategically to people who are useful, who have leverage, who can be controlled. But you're a teacher. You have nothing I need, no power I want. By extending my protection to you, I'm sending a message that's being dissected by every family, every crew, every ambitious captain who thinks I'm going soft." Sophie's throat tightened. "I didn't ask for any of that. I know. That's what makes it real." Luca moved closer, and Sophie caught the scent of expensive cologne and something underneath gun oil maybe, or the metallic tang of danger. "Sophie, I'm 42 years old. I've been running this organization since I was 25. I've made decisions that haunt me, given orders I can't take back, buried people I loved and people I destroyed. But my son is the only pure thing in my life, the only choice I've made that I'll never regret. And you gave him something I can't normalcy, safety at school, a teacher who sees him as remarkable instead of tragic." "He is remarkable," Sophie said softly. "I know. But the world needs to see it too. And yesterday, you made the world a little safer for him." Luca's hand lifted, almost reaching for her face before he caught himself. "Let it fall. I need you to know that anything you need, anything you want, it's yours. A better apartment, security, money for those student loans Marco told me about." "Marco told you about my student loans?" He's observant. "He mentioned you work 2 jobs, that you take the bus in all weather, that you eat lunch in your classroom instead of the teacher's lounge because you can't afford to buy food out. He worries about you." Sophie felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm fine. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's payment for a debt I can never fully repay. Then we're even, Sophie said firmly. You secured my job. That's payment enough. I don't want your money, Mr. Valentini. I just want to teach your son and any other kid who needs someone in their corner. Luca studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised. You're going to be trouble, Sophie Chen. I can tell. Good. Someone should be. The tension broke. Luca moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a worn volume. Have you read this? It's Marco's current obsession. A fantasy series about a boy with a disability who becomes a king's advisor. He thinks you'd like it. He's probably right. I'll borrow it if that's okay. Keep it. We have 3 copies. Marco likes to gift books to people he thinks will appreciate them. Sophie took the book, feeling the weight of the gesture. Not just a loan, but a gift. Another line crossed. Another step deeper into this world. They rejoined Marco in his room, where he was working on homework spread across a custom desk designed to accommodate his wheelchair. The rest of the evening passed in comfortable conversation about books, about teaching, about Marco's plans to become a journalist when he grew up. I want to tell true stories, Marco explained. Stories about people who get overlooked, about how strength comes in different forms, about how disability isn't tragedy, it's just a different way of navigating the world. You'll be brilliant at it, Sophie said with conviction. When it was time to leave, Luca insisted on driving her home. In the car, with Marco dozing in his seat, the radio playing soft classical music, Sophie felt a strange sense of peace. Thank you for coming tonight, Luca said as they neared her building. It meant everything to Marco. He doesn't have many people he trusts. He's easy to care about. Is he the only one? The question was quiet, almost hesitant. Sophie turned to look at Luca's profile in the dim light. What do you mean? I mean that you came back, after I warned you about consequences, after you saw how I handle threats, after you had every reason to keep your distance. You came back anyway. Why? Sophie considered the question. Because Marco deserves to have people in his life who see him fully. And because... She hesitated, then pushed forward. Because I think you deserve that too. Luca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sophie, I'm not naive, she interrupted. I know what you are. I know the rumors, the whispers. I know that associating with you puts me in a world I don't understand. But I also know that you're a father who would burn down the world for his son. That you cook him dinner and build him libraries and make sure he knows he's loved. And somehow, that's enough for me. They sat in silence for a long moment after he parked. Finally, Luca turned to face her. You scare me, he said quietly. Not because you're a threat, but because you make me want things I gave up on a long time ago. Normal things. Dinners with someone who looks at me like I'm human, instead of a monster. Conversations that don't involve body counts or territory disputes. A life that's more than just survival. What's stopping you? The fact that normal is a luxury people like me don't get. The fact that every person who gets close to me becomes a target. The fact that I've already risked too much by bringing you into our lives. Sophie reached across the center console, placing her hand over his. Then maybe it's time to redefine what normal means. Maybe it doesn't have to be safe or simple. Maybe it just has to be real. Luca stared at their joined hands like he was seeing a miracle. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise and a prayer and a plea all at once. Go inside, he said roughly. Before I do something we'll both regret. Sophie nodded, understanding that they were standing at a precipice, that one more step would change everything. Thank you for dinner, she said, opening the car door. Tell Marco, I'll see him in class. Sophie, she turned back. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me. Day or night, promise me. I promise. She walked to her building, feeling his eyes on her until she was safely inside. Only then did she hear the SUV drive away. That night, Sophie lay in bed holding the book Marco had given her, thinking about crossing lines and impossible choices, and a man whose darkness somehow made him more human, not less. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Luca. Marco wanted to make sure I had your number in case of emergencies. He's not subtle. Thank you again for tonight. Sleep well. Sophie stared at the message, her heart racing. She should delete it, maintain boundaries, keep this professional. Instead, she typed back, "Tell Marco he's very clever, and you're welcome. Same to you." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I haven't slept well in 3 years. But tonight, I think I might. Knowing you're safe, knowing Marco has you in his corner, that's enough." Sophie set her phone down, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything, despite the danger and complications and impossible nature of what was happening. She was falling for a mafia boss who loved his son more than life itself. And somehow, that felt like the sanest thing she'd done in years. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after that dinner at the Valentini house. Sophie arrived at school to find her classroom door open. Not just unlocked, actually open, swinging slightly in the draft from the hallway. Her stomach dropped. She always locked up, always double-checked. It was habit born from years of working in underfunded schools where supplies went missing if you weren't careful. She pushed the door wider, and her breath caught. The room had been ransacked, not destroyed, but searched. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, her desk rifled through with methodical precision. This wasn't vandalism. This was someone looking for something. "Miss Chen?" Principal Howard's voice came from behind her, sharp with concern. "What happened here?" "I don't know. I just arrived." Howard pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. Don't touch anything." But Sophie was already moving through the room, her teacher's instinct taking inventory. Student work was untouched, the classroom library intact, her laptop still in its locked drawer. Whoever had done this hadn't been interested in theft. Her eyes landed on her desk, on the spot where she kept her personal items. The photograph of her and her parents still there, her coffee mug undisturbed, but the business card Luca had given her, the one with just a phone number that she'd tucked into her planner, was lying on top of her desk, deliberately placed where she'd see it immediately. A message. Sophie's hands trembled as she picked up the card. On the back, someone had written in red marker, "Stay away from the Valentini family. This is your only warning." The police came, took statements, dusted for prints that Sophie knew wouldn't lead anywhere. Whoever had done this was professional enough to avoid leaving evidence. As officers photographed the scene, Sophie texted Luca, "Someone broke into my classroom, left a message about staying away from you and Marco. I'm okay, but you should know." The response came within seconds. "Where are you now? Are you safe?" "At school. Police are here. I'm fine. I'm sending someone. Don't leave the building until they arrive." Sophie wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need protection, but the fear crawling up her spine made her pragmatic. Someone had been in her classroom, had touched her things, had delivered a threat with surgical precision. Okay. 20 minutes later, a woman appeared in Sophie's doorway. She was tall, maybe 40, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. "Miss Chen, I'm Daniela. Rossi. Mr. Valentini asked me to ensure your safety." Her voice carried a trace of Italian accent, cultured and controlled. "I'm fine, really. The police are handling it." Daniela's smile was thin. "With respect, Miss Chen, the police have no idea what they're dealing with. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a message from people who don't make idle threats. I'll be accompanying you for the foreseeable future." "Accompanying me? Like a bodyguard?" "Exactly like a bodyguard. I'm former Italian intelligence, now head of security for the Valentini family. Where you go, I go, Mr." Valentini was very clear on this point. Sophie opened her mouth to protest, but Principal Howard interrupted. "Miss Chen, given the circumstances, I think it's wise to accept the help. Until we understand what's happening, your safety is paramount." The rest of the school day passed in a surreal haze. Daniela positioned herself outside Sophie's classroom, a silent sentinel that made students whisper and parents stare. Marco arrived for class looking worried, his dark eyes finding Sophie immediately. "Are you okay?" he whispered when he wheeled past her desk. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little scare, nothing to worry about." But Marco wasn't fooled. He'd grown up in a world where little scares were often preludes to violence. He kept glancing at the door, at Daniela's imposing figure, his usually animated face creased with concern. During lunch, Sophie found a quiet corner of the teacher's lounge and called Luca. He answered on the first ring. "Sophie, tell me everything." She recounted the break-in, the message, the methodical way her classroom had been searched. Luca listened in silence, and Sophie could feel his rage building through the phone, cold and controlled. "This is because of me," he said finally. "Because I protected you. Because I made you visible to people who see anyone connected to me as either an asset or a liability. Who would do this? I have theories, none of them pleasant." Luca's voice was granite. "There's been tension recently. Internal issues I thought I'd contained. Apparently I was wrong." "Internal? You mean within your organization?" "Yes. There are people who think I've gone soft. That prioritizing Marco's well-being, building a legitimate future for him, means I'm weak. They see you as evidence of that weakness, a schoolteacher with no strategic value who somehow warranted my protection." Sophie felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that by defending my son, you became a symbol. And symbols are dangerous in my world. They can be used to send messages, to challenge authority, to test boundaries." He paused. "Sophie, I need you to understand something. The people who did this won't stop with a warning. If they think you're a vulnerability, they'll exploit it. Which means you have two choices." "What choices?" "1. You distance yourself from Marco and me completely. Publicly. Dramatically. You request a transfer to another school. You cut all contact. You make it clear we mean nothing to you. Daniela will ensure your safety during the transition, and I'll make sure you're set up somewhere far from Chicago, where my enemies can't reach you." Sophie's heart clenched. "And the second choice? You let me protect you. Fully. Completely. You move into a secure location. You accept round-the-clock security. You become part of my world in a way that makes it clear harming you would be the same as harming me. It means giving up your independence, your privacy, your normal life. It means accepting that every decision you make will be filtered through security concerns. It means living in a cage, even if it's a gilded one. Those are both terrible options. They're the only options I can offer that keep you alive." Luca's voice cracked slightly. "Sophie, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have known better than to bring you into this, should have kept my distance. But I was selfish. You made me feel human again, and I couldn't walk away." Sophie closed her eyes, thinking about Marco's essay, about the way Luca had kissed her knuckles in the car, about the library full of books and the pasta made with his mother's recipe, thinking about the choice between safety through isolation and safety through connection. "There's a third option," she said quietly. "What third option?" "The one where we figure out who's threatening me and we stop them. Where instead of running or hiding, we solve the actual problem." Luca was silent for so long, Sophie thought the call had dropped. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You want to go on offense, against people who've been killing for longer than you've been alive. I want to not spend my life running or locked in a cage. I want to teach. I want to have dinner with you and Marco without armed guards. I want normal Luca, or at least our version of it. And the only way to get that is to eliminate the threat, not just hide from it. Sophie, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These aren't people you negotiate with. They're people who respond to one language, power. Demonstrated, brutal, undeniable power." "Then demonstrate it." Sophie's voice was steel. "You're the head of this family, right? Someone is challenging your authority, so remind them why you're in charge. Not by hurting me or hiding me, but by showing them that threatening what's yours has consequences." Another long silence. Then Luca's voice, rough with something Sophie couldn't identify, respect maybe, or fear, or both. "You're terrifying. Do you know that? I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. Terrifying is a job requirement. If we do this, if I actually pursue the people behind this, it won't be clean. It won't be legal. And you'll know things about me, about what I'm capable of, that you can't unknow. I already know you're capable of violence, Luca. What I need to know is if you're capable of protecting the people you love without destroying yourself in the process. For Marco? For you?" His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm capable of anything. Then let's end this. Together." After school, Daniela drove Sophie to a location she wouldn't disclose. They wound through Chicago streets, doubling back, taking side roads, until Sophie was thoroughly disoriented. Finally, they pulled into an underground parking garage beneath an unremarkable office building in the Loop. "Where are we?" Sophie asked. Neutral ground. Mr. Valentini uses this location for sensitive meetings. It's swept daily for surveillance, and the building has security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. They took an elevator to the 20th floor, emerging into a space that looked like a high-end law office. Mahogany paneling, leather furniture, abstract art on the walls, but Sophie noticed the details that marked it as something else: reinforced doors, cameras, hidden in crown molding, the way every window was treated with what looked like bulletproof glass. Luca was waiting in a conference room, but he wasn't alone. 4 men sat around the table, each one radiating the same controlled danger she'd felt from Luca. These were captains, she realized, the leaders of different crews within his organization. Gentlemen, Luca said, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is Sophie Chen, the woman whose classroom was violated this morning, the woman who was threatened for the crime of defending my son. He paused, letting that sink in. I want to make something very clear. Sophie is under my personal protection, not because she's useful, not because she has leverage, but because she showed my son dignity when the world showed him contempt. Because she's a good person in a world that often punishes goodness. And because anyone who threatens her threatens me directly. One of the men, older with gray hair and calculating eyes, spoke up. With respect, Luca, the men are talking. They say you're distracted, that you care more about playing house with your son's teacher than about business, that you've forgotten what it means to lead. Francesco, Luca's voice could have cut glass. What it means to lead is understanding what's worth protecting. My son is worth protecting. The people who show him kindness are worth protecting. And anyone who disagrees is welcome to challenge me directly, instead of sending cowards to break into classrooms. It wasn't us, another man said quickly. None of the families would move against you without consensus. This is something else. Then find out what. Luca leaned forward. I want to know who ordered this. I want to know why. And I want them delivered to me within 48 hours. Is that clear? The men nodded, but Sophie could see the calculation in their eyes. They were measuring Luca, deciding if he was still the man who'd commanded their loyalty for 17 years, or if he'd become something weaker. Luca must have seen it too, because he stood, moving around the table with predatory grace. Let me tell you a story, he said softly. 3 years ago, my son was in a car accident. Someone ran a red light, T-boned us at an intersection. I walked away with bruises. Marco's spine was crushed. The driver fled the scene. Do you know what I did? The men were silent. I found him. It took me 3 months, but I found him. He was hiding in Milwaukee. Thought he'd gotten away with it, and I made him understand, in exquisite detail, what happens when you hurt my child. Not quickly, not mercifully. I took my time. I wanted him to feel every second of Marco's pain, every moment of his fear, every ounce of his suffering. And when I was done, when there was nothing left but broken bones and shattered promises, I made sure everyone knew. I made sure every person in every organization in this city understood that Marco Valentini is untouchable. Luca stopped in front of Francesco. So when you ask if I've gone soft, when you question my priorities, remember that story. Remember that the man who did that to an anonymous driver is the same man standing here now. The only difference is that I've added one more name to the list of people I'll destroy worlds to protect. Sophie Chen is that name, and whoever tested me by threatening her is about to learn that some lessons have to be taught in blood. The room was silent. Sophie felt her heart hammering, torn between horror at the violence Luca described and understanding that this was who he'd always been. The difference was that now she was seeing it unmasked. We'll find them, Francesco said finally. You have my word. Good, because if I have to find them myself, I'll be asking questions about how such a significant security breach occurred under your watch, and those questions will be unpleasant for everyone involved. The men filed out, leaving Sophie and Luca alone. He stood with his back to her, shoulders tense, hands braced on the conference table. Now you know, he said quietly. Now you've seen what I am when the civilized mask comes off. Still think you want to be part of this? Sophie stood, walking around the table to face him. His eyes were dark with barely contained violence, with the rage of a man who'd been challenged and was calculating response strategies. I think, Sophie said carefully, that you're a man who loves his son so completely that you became a monster to protect him. I think you carry enormous guilt for what happened to Marco, and you've built your entire world around making sure he never suffers again. I think the violence scares you more than it scares me because you know how easily you can slip into it. You should be running. Probably. But I'm not. Sophie reached up, cupping his face in her hands, feeling the tension in his jaw. Luca, I'm not naive. I know what you've done. I know what you're capable of. But I also know that you read bedtime stories and cook pasta and build libraries. You're not one thing. You're both the monster and the father. And somehow, I'm okay with that. How? His voice broke. How can you be okay with what I just described? Because it wasn't random violence. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a father avenging his child. Was it legal? No. Was it moral? That's complicated. But was it understandable? Yes, completely. Luca pulled her against him suddenly, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. Sophie felt him shaking, felt the careful control he maintained every second threatening to crack. I can't lose anyone else, he whispered into her hair. I can't survive it. Maria, Marco's mother, she died because of me. Because my enemies saw a vulnerability and exploited it. Car bomb meant for me hit her instead. Marco was in the back seat. He survived, but she didn't. And that's been my hell for 3 years. The knowledge that my world killed her. That Marco lost his mother and his ability to walk because of me. I won't let that happen again. I can't. Sophie held him tighter, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't just about protection. This was about trauma, about guilt that had calcified into armor. Then we stop running from ghosts and we face the threat, she said firmly. Not by hiding me away where your enemies can't reach, but by making it clear that I'm not a vulnerability. I'm a strength. We show them that people who care about Marco, who make his life better, are assets to you, not weaknesses to exploit. Luca pulled back enough to look at her. How? By living. By refusing to let fear dictate our choices. You keep leading your organization. I keep teaching. Marco keeps being brilliant. And whoever thinks they can use me to hurt you learns that I'm not some fragile thing that breaks under pressure. I'm a woman who stands her ground. Sophie, no, listen to me. These people broke into my classroom, expecting to scare me off. They thought one threat would be enough. So let's show them they were wrong. Let's show everyone that Sophie Chen doesn't scare easy, that Luca Valentini doesn't back down, and that threatening what's his comes with consequences they can't imagine. A slow smile spread across Luca's face, dangerous and admiring. You really are terrifying. Good. Let's use that. The plan came together over the next 48 hours. Daniela became Sophie's constant shadow, but instead of hiding that protection, they made it visible. Sophie returned to school with a bodyguard, teaching her classes normally, refusing to show fear or disruption. The message was clear. Threats wouldn't change her routine. Meanwhile, Luca's organization worked with frightening efficiency. Francesco's crew tracked the security footage, identified the break-in perpetrator, a low-level associate named Tommy Rizzo, who worked for a rival crew. More investigation revealed that Tommy hadn't been acting on family orders. He'd been hired by an outside contractor, someone with a grudge against the Valentini family who saw Sophie as an easy target. The name that surfaced made Luca go still and cold. Victor Castellano, a former associate who'd been exiled 3 years ago for trying to take over during Marco's hospitalization. Victor had disappeared to New York, nursing his resentment, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. He thought you'd gotten weak, Francesco explained during a meeting Sophie was now included in. Thought that caring about your son, building a life outside the business, made you vulnerable. He hired Tommy to scare the teacher, figuring you'd either hide her away and look weak, or let her get hurt and look incompetent. Either way, you lose respect. Where is he now? Luca's voice was deadly calm. We're tracking him. He's been in and out of Chicago over the past month. We think he's building support for a move against you, convincing younger associates that leadership needs to change. Sophie watched Luca process this, saw the gears turning behind his eyes. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about a challenge to his authority, about men who thought they could exploit his love for his son as weakness. Set up a meeting, Luca said finally. Tell Victor I want to negotiate. Tell him I'm tired of fighting, that maybe it's time to step back, focus on Marco, make him think he's won. You're laying a trap, Sophie said. "I'm ending this. Victor wants my position? He can have it, after he explains to everyone why he thought threatening a schoolteacher was an acceptable strategy. After he confesses to hiring someone to terrorize an innocent woman. After every associate sees what happens when you mistake love for weakness." "Luca," Francesco said carefully, "if you're planning what I think you're planning, it needs to be public. It needs to send a message." "Oh, it will be." Luca's smile was cold. "Victor thinks I've gone soft? Let's show him exactly how soft I've become." The meeting was set for Saturday night at a warehouse in the industrial district neutral ground. Supposedly, though Sophie knew Luca would have every advantage mapped out. She wasn't supposed to attend, but when she insisted, Luca didn't argue. He understood that hiding her now would undermine everything they were trying to prove. "You stay with Daniela," he instructed. "You stay in the car unless I specifically call for you. And if anything goes wrong, if there's even a hint of danger, Daniela gets you out immediately. No arguments." "No arguments," Sophie agreed. Saturday arrived cold and gray, November wind whipping off Lake Michigan with bitter determination. Sophie dressed practically jeans, boots, a warm jacket, and tried not to think about what she was about to witness. Marco knew something was happening. He'd been quiet all week, watching his father with worried eyes. That morning, before Luca left for final preparations, Marco wheeled into the kitchen where Sophie was having coffee. "He's going to do something bad tonight, isn't he?" Marco said without preamble. Sophie set down her mug. Over the past weeks, she'd been staying in one of the Valentini house's guest rooms, part of the security protocol. It had given her unprecedented access to their daily life, to the quiet moments that revealed who they really were. "He's going to do what's necessary to protect you, to protect us." That's what Mom used to say. What's necessary. And then one day, what was necessary got her killed. Marco's voice was flat, emotionless in the way of someone who'd learned to lock feelings away. "I don't want to lose him too. I don't want to lose you." Sophie knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hands. "Marco, listen to me. Your dad has spent 3 years building walls around you, around himself, around everything he loves. And tonight, he's going to remind people why those walls exist. Not because he's cruel, but because he's protective. There's a difference." "Is there? Really?" "Yes. Cruelty is violence without purpose. Protection is violence with love behind it. Your dad doesn't hurt people because he enjoys it. He does it because the alternative is losing what matters most. And you, sweetheart, you're what matters most." Marco's eyes filled with tears. "I hate this. I hate that people get hurt because of me. I hate that the wheelchair makes me a target. I hate that Dad has to be a monster to keep me safe." "Oh, Marco." Sophie pulled him into a hug. "You're not responsible for other people's choices. Not the driver who hit your car. Not the men who see your dad's love as weakness. Not any of it. You're just a kid who deserves to live without fear. And your dad is making sure that happens. Will you make sure he comes home?" Marco's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "Will you make sure he doesn't go too far?" It was a heavy request, asking her to be Luca's conscience, his anchor to humanity. But Sophie understood that someone needed to be. "I'll make sure," she promised. That night, Sophie sat in the back of an SUV with Daniela, watching the warehouse from a distance. Multiple vehicles had arrived over the past hour. Luca's associates, Victor's people, neutral observers from other families who'd come to witness whatever was about to unfold. "This is how succession works in our world," Daniela explained quietly. "When someone challenges the boss, there has to be a public resolution. Either the challenger proves the boss is weak, or the boss proves they're not. Tonight determines whether Luca keeps his position or loses everything. What happens if he loses? He dies. So does Marco, probably. And you. Victors don't leave loose ends." Sophie's stomach churned. "That's not going to happen." "No," Daniela agreed, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "It's not. I've worked for Luca for 12 years. I've seen him angry, desperate, ruthless. But I've never seen him like he's been this past week. He's not just fighting for position. He's fighting for the right to love his son without apology, for the right to build a life that includes normal things like school teachers and family dinners. Men fighting for that? They don't lose." Through the warehouse windows, Sophie could see figures gathering. Luca stood in the center, surrounded by his captains. Across from him, a man she assumed was Victor, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating aggressive confidence. "They're talking terms," Daniela narrated. "Victor's probably offering a peaceful transition, suggesting Luca step down voluntarily, keep some territory, retire with dignity. And Luca? Watch." Even from a distance, Sophie could see Luca's body language shift. He moved toward Victor with deliberate slowness, saying something that made the other man laugh. Then, before anyone could react, Luca moved. It happened so fast, Sophie almost missed it. One moment they were talking. The next, Victor was on the ground, Luca's knee on his chest, a gun pressed to his temple. But Luca didn't fire. Instead, he pulled out his phone, and through the warehouse windows, Sophie saw a projection appear on the wall, security footage from Tommy Rizzo's interrogation. Tommy, clearly terrified, confessing that Victor had hired him to threaten Sophie, that the plan was to make Luca look weak, to undermine his authority by showing he couldn't protect a woman his son cared about. The assembled men watched in silence as Tommy detailed the entire plot. Then the footage cut to something else. Victor, caught on recording, laughing about how easy it would be to exploit Luca's soft spot, how pathetic he'd become, caring more about his crippled kid than about the family. Sophie felt rage boil up in her chest at that phrase. Beside her, Daniela's jaw tightened. In the warehouse, Luca stood, hauling Victor up with him. He said something Sophie couldn't hear, but she saw the impact. Victor's face went white. The assembled men shifted, murmuring. Then Luca did something unexpected. He holstered his gun. "He's giving him a choice," Daniela breathed. "Fight or submit." Victor chose to fight. It wasn't even close. Luca moved with brutal efficiency, years of violence compressed into seconds of controlled fury. Victor went down hard, stayed down. But Luca didn't kill him. Instead, he dragged the man to his feet, turned him to face the assembled crowd, and said something that made several men nod in agreement. "Judgment," Daniela translated, though Sophie hadn't heard the words. "He's letting the captains decide Victor's fate. It's brilliant, making them complicit in the punishment, reinforcing his authority while showing he trusts their counsel." The vote was unanimous. Victor was exiled permanently, stripped of all territory and protection, forbidden from ever returning to Chicago. It was a death sentence of a different kind in their world. A man, without family protection, was prey for anyone with a grudge. As Victor was dragged out by his former associates, Luca turned to address the crowd. Sophie watched him speak, watched the men respond, watched power and respect flow back to him like a tide that had never really ebbed. 30 minutes later, Luca emerged from the warehouse. He walked directly to Sophie's SUV, opened the door, and slid in beside her. His knuckles were bleeding. His face was spattered with someone else's blood, but his eyes, when they met Sophie's, were calm. "It's over," he said simply. "Is he dead?" "No. Worse, he's powerless. By Monday morning, Victor Castellano will be running from everyone he ever crossed, with no protection, no resources, no family, and everyone in Chicago will know that he fell because he made the mistake of threatening what's mine." Sophie should have been horrified, should have been repulsed by the violence, the brutality, the cold calculation of it all. Instead, she reached for Luca's bleeding hand, holding it gently. "Take me home," she said. "Take me home to Marco. He's been worried." Luca's expression cracked, vulnerability flooding through. "How is he?" "Scared. Trying to be brave. Needing his father." "And you? How are you?" Sophie considered the question. She'd just witnessed a Mafia power play. She'd seen Luca beat a man bloody. She'd watched justice dispensed according to rules she didn't fully understand. But she'd also seen a father protecting his son with every tool available to him. She'd seen a man refusing to let love be twisted into weakness. She'd seen someone fighting for the right to build a life that included both darkness and light. "I'm okay," she said honestly. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Luca lifted their joined hands, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both?" "Probably." He looked up, and Sophie saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you for staying, for not running, for seeing me at my worst and not flinching. Thank you for protecting us. All of us. Your son, Me, the life we're trying to build. I know what it cost you tonight. It cost nothing compared to what I would have lost. They drove home through the dark Chicago streets, Daniela at the wheel, Luca's hand in Sophie's, the city lights streaming past like falling stars. At the house, Marco was waiting in the living room, trying to read, but clearly unable to concentrate. When Luca walked in, bloodied but whole, Marco's face crumpled with relief. "Dad, I'm okay, figlio mio. Everything's okay." Marco wheeled forward, and Luca dropped to his knees, pulling his son into a fierce embrace. Sophie watched from the doorway, her heart full and breaking simultaneously. "Miss Chen?" Marco reached out one hand toward her. She crossed the room, kneeling beside them, and felt Luca's arm wrap around her too, pulling her into their circle. The three of them held each other in the soft lamplight, a family forged from violence and love and impossible choices. "We're safe," Luca whispered. "All of us. We're safe." And for the first time in 3 years, Sophie believed it might actually be true. Later that night, after Marco was asleep, Sophie and Luca sat in the library, the room that had become her favorite place in the house. Luca had cleaned up, changed into comfortable clothes, but exhaustion lined his face. "What happens now?" Sophie asked. "Now? We live. We build the life we've been fighting for. I continue running the organization, but I also continue being Marco's dad. You continue teaching, changing kids' lives. We have dinners together. We read books. We exist in this strange space between two worlds, and we make it work." "Is it really that simple?" "No." Luca's honesty was refreshing. "There will be more threats, more challenges, more moments where my world crashes into yours in ugly ways. But tonight proved something important, that we're stronger together than separate. That love isn't a weakness if you refuse to let it be weaponized." Sophie moved closer to him on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd fall for a Mafia boss. I never thought I'd fall for a schoolteacher who quotes poetry and threatens bullies." "When did you know?" Sophie asked. "When did you know you were falling for me?" Luca was quiet for a moment. "That first day, when you called me about my mother being poisoned." "No, wait, wrong story," he smiled slightly. "That first day, when I came to pick up Marco and found you standing in the rain, having just defended him against boys twice your size. You were soaked, shivering, and you looked at me like you were ready to fight me too if necessary. You didn't care who I was. You only cared that my son was safe. That's when I knew." "And when did you know you were in love with me?" "The night you came to dinner, when Marco showed you the library, and you looked at those books like they were treasure. When you accepted us, both of us, with all our complications and darkness and broken pieces. When you saw me truly and didn't run, that's when I knew I was lost." Sophie turned to face him, cupping his scarred cheek. "I love you, Luca Valentini. I love you and your brilliant son and your complicated life and your fierce protection. I love the pasta you cook and the books you read, and the way you'd burn down the world for the people you care about. I love all of it." Luca's eyes shimmered. "I love you, Sophie Chen. I love your courage and your kindness and your refusal to accept injustice. I love that you see Marco as remarkable. I love that you make me want to be better while accepting who I am. I love you so much it terrifies me. Then let's be terrified together." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Sophie felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or the simple knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "Stay," Luca whispered against her lips. "Not in the guest room, not as security protocol. Stay with us. Build a life here. Be part of our family." "Are you asking me to move in?" "I'm asking you to be mine. Completely. Publicly. I want the world to know that Sophie Chen is under my protection not because she's vulnerable, but because she's precious. I want Marco to have stability, family, someone who loves him as fiercely as I do. I want to wake up every morning and know you're here. Is that too much?" Sophie thought about her tiny studio apartment, her 2 jobs, her carefully independent life. Then she thought about Marco's laughter, Luca's fierce love, the library full of books, and the kitchen full of warmth. "It's not too much," she said softly. "It's everything. Yes, I'll stay." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and outside the library windows, Chicago spread out beneath them like a kingdom of light and shadow, of danger and hope, of a future they would build together. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One act of courage at a time. 3 months later, Sophie stood in her classroom decorating for the winter festival. The break-in felt like ancient history now, though Daniela still appeared occasionally, a quiet reminder that protection remained even when threats had faded. Marco wheeled through the door, followed by Jasmine and 3 other students who'd become his close friends. The social isolation had dissolved gradually, replaced by genuine connection as kids realized Marco was funny and smart and kind. "Miss Chen, we finished the banner," Marco announced, unrolling a hand-painted sign that read, "Heroes come in all forms." It was part of a class project about real-world heroes, not celebrities or athletes, but ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Marco had chosen his father, writing an essay that brought tears to Sophie's eyes about how real strength meant protecting people without seeking credit, how love manifested in sacrifice, how heroes were often complicated people making difficult choices for the right reasons. "It's perfect," Sophie said, helping them hang it. As the students worked, her phone buzzed. A text from Luca. Marco's teacher evaluation came back. Apparently he's thriving socially and academically, showing remarkable resilience and leadership. "I wonder who's responsible for that." Sophie smiled, typing back. "Takes a village. Or in this case, takes an overprotective mafia boss, a brilliant kid, and a stubborn teacher who refused to look the other way. Best village I've ever known. Dinner tonight? I'm making that risotto you like." "Perfect. I'll bring wine. You live here now. You don't have to bring anything. Old habits. See you at 7. She looked up to find Marco watching her with a knowing smile. "Texting my dad?" he asked innocently. "Maybe. You know he's going to propose, right? Like, soon. He'd been looking at rings. I caught him." Sophie's heart skipped. "Marco, it's okay. I want him to." Marco's expression was serious. "You make him happy. You make us both happy. And you're already family anyway. Might as well make it official." "What if I'm not ready?" "Are you? Not ready?" Sophie considered. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling teacher with 2 jobs and no prospects. Now she was living in a brownstone in Lincoln Park, in love with a mafia boss, helping raise his remarkable son, building a life that shouldn't work but somehow did. "No," she admitted. "I'm ready. Scared, but ready." "Good, because Dad's planning this big romantic thing and I helped. It involves the library, about 1,000 candles, and a first edition of your favorite book. So, act surprised when it happens, okay?" Sophie laughed, pulling Marco into a hug. "You're the best kid. You know that?" "I'm pretty great," he agreed without false modesty. "And you're pretty great too. Which is why you're perfect for us." That night, Sophie came home to find exactly what Marco had described: the library transformed by candlelight, soft music playing, and Luca standing in the center holding a leather-bound first edition of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. "Sophie Chen," he said as she entered, his voice rough with emotion. "6 months ago, you walked into my life, defending my son from bullies. You had no idea who we were, what world you were stepping into, what dangers you'd face. But you didn't hesitate. You saw a child who needed protecting, and you acted." He set down the book, moving closer. "Since then, you've faced threats, violence, and the reality of what I am. You've seen me at my worst and somehow found things to love. You've made Marco laugh in ways I haven't heard since before the accident. You've made me believe that maybe I can be more than just the monster who protects what's his. Maybe I can be a man who builds something good." Luca dropped to one knee, and Sophie's breath caught. "I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you safety without complications. But I can promise you all of me, the darkness and the light, the violence and the tenderness, everything I am and everything I'm trying to become. I can promise you a family that will love you fiercely, a son who adores you, a life that might be unconventional but will never be boring." He pulled out a ring, elegant, simple, perfect. "Marry me, Sophie, not because it's practical or strategic or makes sense. Marry me because you love me, and I love you, and life's too short to waste time pretending we can be anything other than what we are. Marry me and let's build the future together. What do you say?" Sophie felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about every choice that had led her here, every moment of courage and fear and impossible odds. She thought about Marco in the next room, probably listening at the door. She thought about the life waiting for her. If she said yes, complicated, dangerous, beautiful, real. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry both of you. I'll be part of this family, and we'll face whatever comes together. Luca slid the ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like joy and tears and promises kept. When they finally broke apart, they heard cheering from the hallway. Marco wheeled in, grinning like he'd won the lottery. She said yes. I knew she'd say yes. Dad, you can stop stressing now. Come here, figlio mio, Luca said, and Marco wheeled forward into their embrace. The three of them stood in the candlelit library, holding each other, a family formed from tragedy and choice and love powerful enough to defy every rule about how things were supposed to work. Outside, Chicago glittered with a million lights, each one a story, a life, a choice made in darkness or light. And in one brownstone in Lincoln Park, three people who shouldn't fit together had created something perfect. Not despite their complications, but because of them. The spring sun filtered through the tall windows of Sophie Valentini's classroom. Her name had changed 6 months ago in a small private ceremony with only Marco, Father Paolo, and a handful of Luca's most trusted associates present. She still went by Miss Chen at school, keeping her professional identity separate, but the ring on her finger told a different story. Miss Chen, can you help me with this paragraph? A small voice pulled her attention. It was Maya, a shy girl who'd transferred mid-year, another child the system had failed until she landed in Sophie's classroom. Of course, sweetheart. Sophie knelt beside Maya's desk, reading her essay about her grandmother. This is beautiful. You write with such love. Maya beamed, and Sophie felt the familiar warmth that reminded her why she still taught despite Luca's offers to let her stop working, to focus on family, to live the life of leisure his wealth could provide. But these moments with children who needed someone to see them, this was her purpose. The lunch bell rang, and students flooded out. Sophie was gathering papers when her phone buzzed. A text from Luca, accompanied by a photo that made her heart stop. It was Marco, standing, supported by parallel bars and wearing complex braces, but vertical for the first time in 3 years. His face was split in a grin of pure triumph, and Luca stood beside him, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. The experimental surgery worked. He took 4 steps today. 4 steps, Sophie. Our boy is walking. Sophie's hands shook as she dialed Luca's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with emotion. Did you see it? Did you see the photo? I saw it. Oh my God, Luca. I saw it. Sophie was crying now, not caring that she was in her classroom, that anyone could walk by. How is he? Exhausted. In pain. Absolutely refusing to stop trying. Luca laughed, that beautiful sound of pure joy she'd heard more frequently over the past year. The doctors say it'll take months of physical therapy, that he may always need assistance for long distances. But Sophie, he's walking. My son is walking. I'm coming there. Tell me where you are. Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, 4th floor. But Sophie, your classes can be covered. I'm coming. She'd learned something important over the past year. Sometimes the most important lessons happened outside classrooms. Sometimes, choosing family over protocol, love over obligation, was the bravest thing you could do. 40 minutes later, Sophie burst through the doors of the physical therapy center. Daniela had driven her, the security detail now so familiar Sophie barely noticed it. She found them in a private room, Marco back in his wheelchair but radiating pride, Luca beside him with red-rimmed eyes and the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. You came, Marco said, and Sophie heard how much it meant to him. Of course I came. You walked, Marco. You walked. 4 whole steps. He was trying to be modest, but excitement leaked through every word. Dr. Rodriguez says if I keep progressing, I might be able to walk short distances within 6 months. Maybe even play adaptive sports. Maybe even... He stopped, voice cracking. Maybe even dance at your and Dad's wedding reception. The real one. The big one you keep planning. Sophie had been pushing for a larger celebration, wanting to share their joy with the world. Luca had been hesitant, worried about making her a target, but she'd insisted. They'd compromised on an event at the house, intimate but meaningful, scheduled for June. You'll dance? Sophie said fiercely, crossing to hug him. You'll dance, and it'll be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever seen. That night, the three of them celebrated at home with Marco's favorite meal, Luca's homemade pizza and tiramisu. Marco talked nonstop about the surgery, the therapy, his plans for the future. He wanted to try for the school track team's wheelchair racing division, wanted to write an article about accessibility for the school newspaper, wanted to live fully and loudly and without apology. "I've been thinking," Marco said as they finished dinner, "about what I want to do, like, for my life." "You're 12, Luca said gently. "You have time to figure that out." "I know, but I've been thinking anyway." Marco looked between them. "I want to be a lawyer, specifically, a disability rights lawyer. I want to help kids like me navigate systems that weren't built for them. I want to fight for accessibility, for inclusion, for the right to be seen as capable instead of tragic." Sophie felt her throat tighten with pride. "You'll be extraordinary at it. But that means I need to stay clean, right? Like I can't be associated with." Marco gestured vaguely at Luca, the unspoken reality of his father's business hanging in the air. Luca's expression shifted, pain and pride warring. "You're right, which is why I've been making changes." Sophie looked at him sharply. They'd talked about this, about gradually transitioning the family business toward legitimate enterprises. But Luca had always been cautious, worried about creating power vacuums or showing weakness. "What kind of changes?" she asked. "I've been working with Francesco and the other captains. We're systematically divesting from anything that could come back on Marco or you. The gambling operations are being shut down. The protection rackets are ending. We're moving everything we can toward legitimate construction, real estate development, import-export businesses that actually follow the law." Luca reached across the table, taking Sophie's hand. "It's slow. It's complicated. There are people who aren't happy about it. But I'm doing it anyway because my son shouldn't have to choose between his dreams and his family." "Dad," Marco's voice broke, "you've given me so much, figlio mio. You've given me purpose, motivation, a reason to be better than I was. Let me give you this. Let me give you a future where the Valentini name means something other than fear. It'll take years, maybe a decade, but we'll get there. I promise you." Sophie watched father and son embrace, understanding the weight of what Luca was offering. He wasn't just changing his business, he was dismantling the empire he'd built, the identity he'd claimed for 20 years. Also, his son could pursue a dream. Later, after Marco went to bed, Sophie found Luca on the back terrace, staring at the city lights. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "That was a big promise you made tonight." "I know, but I meant it." Luca turned in her arms. "You've changed me, Sophie. Both of you. You've made me see that strength isn't just about control or fear or power. It's about knowing when to let go, when to build something new, when to admit that the old ways don't serve the future. It's going to be dangerous, isn't it? Restructuring everything? Probably. There will be resistance, challenges, maybe even threats, but we'll handle them, together." He cupped her face gently. "I have something to tell you." Sophie's heart skipped. "What?" "I met with FBI agent Morrison today, the same one who investigated your classroom break-in last year." Luca smiled at her shocked expression. "I offered to testify about specific operations, specific crimes, specific people who've been operating with immunity for too long, in exchange for immunity for my family and a guarantee that Marco and you are protected." "Luca, that's huge. That's terrifying, reckless, possibly suicidal." His laugh was shaky. "Yeah, but it's also necessary. If I want Marco to have a clean slate, I need to clean up the past, not hide from it, not pretend it didn't happen, but actually address it, make amends where I can, accept consequences where I must." Sophie pulled him into a fierce kiss. "You're a good man, Luca Valentini." "I'm a man trying to be good. There's a difference. I've done terrible things, Sophie. Things that would make you sick if you knew the details. But I'm trying to balance the scales now, to build something better. For Marco, for you, for the family we're creating. Our family," Sophie corrected softly. "Not just yours, ours." The wedding reception in June was everything Sophie had dreamed of and nothing she'd expected. The Valentini house was transformed, white flowers everywhere, string lights in the garden, tables set with elegant simplicity. Guests were an unlikely mix, teachers from Sophie's school, Marco's friends and their families, Luca's associates and their carefully vetted plus ones, even Detective Morrison and Agent Chen, who'd become unlikely allies over the past months. But the moment that stopped everyone's breath came when Marco stood from his wheelchair. He was wearing leg braces under his suit pants, and he gripped a walker with determined hands, but he stood. And then, with Luca on one side and Sophie on the other, Marco walked across the garden to the dance floor. 15 steps, each one a victory, each one a testament to courage and determination and love. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sophie barely heard it. She was watching Marco's face, watching pride and joy and sweet relief wash over him as he realized he'd done it. He'd kept his promise to dance at their wedding. The band started playing, something slow and sweet, and the three of them moved together. It wasn't graceful. Marco leaned heavily on them both, his steps uncertain, his breath coming hard. But they were dancing, the three of them, a family bound by choice and courage and love that had survived every test. "Thank you," Marco whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for not giving up on us. Either of us." "Never," Sophie whispered back. "Not ever." As the song ended and guests moved in to celebrate, Sophie caught sight of something that made her heart full. Brandon Kowalski, the boy who'd bullied Marco a year ago, standing at the edge of the crowd. He'd changed dramatically softer somehow, humbler. He caught Sophie's eye and nodded, respect clear in his expression. Later, he approached Marco, extending his hand. "I just wanted to say congratulations, and I'm sorry, for everything." Marco studied him for a long moment, then shook his hand. "We're good. People change. I get that now." It was a small moment, but it represented everything Sophie had fought for: the belief that people could choose better, that second chances mattered, that love and courage could transform the hardest hearts. As the celebration continued into the warm June night, Sophie stood with Luca's arms around her, watching Marco laugh with his friends, watching their strange, beautiful family come together. "Happy?" Luca asked. Sophie thought about the journey from that rainy day defending a bullied child, through threats and violence and impossible choices, to this moment of peace and joy and hard-won hope. "Completely," she said. "We did it, Luca. We built something beautiful from all that darkness. We created a family that shouldn't work but does. We gave Marco a future where he can be anything he dreams." "We did," Luca agreed. "And we're just getting started." In the years that followed, the Valentini name would indeed change its meaning. Luca's testimony would bring down corrupt officials and violent criminals alike. The family business would transform into legitimate enterprises. Marco would graduate top of his class, earn a scholarship to Northwestern, and eventually become the disability rights lawyer he dreamed of being. And Sophie? She continued teaching, continued changing lives one student at a time, continued proving that the most radical act was choosing love, even when the world said it was foolish. Their story wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. But it was real, a testament to the truth that families come in all forms, that redemption is always possible, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is letting yourself be loved by people who see all your darkness and choose you anyway. In a city of millions, in a world of impossible odds, a teacher, a mafia boss, and a remarkable boy in a wheelchair had built something extraordinary. They'd built a home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.